Associate Professor Trevor Mazzucchelli. Trevor is Associate Professor of Clinical Psychology at Curtin University, and he will be talking to us about NDIS and parenting support today. So Trevor, take it away.
Oh, terrific. Thanks, Sylvia. Okay, so yes, welcome to this seminar on the National Disability Insurance Scheme and parenting support. And I should acknowledge right at the outset that this presentation represents the work of the PAFRA NDIS Advocacy Group, and it's a team effort by our members, including Bruce Tong, Sharon Dorr, Avril Brereton, Kirsten Baird-Bate, and Catherine Wade. And before I go any further, I'd like you to know that I'm coming to you from Wajak Butja, where I pay my respect to elders, past, present, and emerging. Just to put this presentation into context, let's first consider how the NDIS came about. And this requires a step back in time and considering the history of support for people with a disability in Australia. Throughout the 19th and early 20th century, the institutionalisation of people with disability was a common practice in Australia. Large institutions housing sometimes hundreds of people with different types of disability was common in most states. And pictured here is the Fremantle Lunatic Asylum and Invalid Depot, which opened in 1865. It was the permanent home for many West Australians with mental illness and intellectual disability. These institutions operated like prisons, and if you look closely, you can maybe see that the residents in the garden are wearing a uniform. They had to get up, eat, and go to bed at set times. For children living in asylums, parents might only be able to visit for a few hours a month. Confining people with disability to institutions was considered the best way to protect them from themselves and to safeguard society. There were fears that if they weren't locked away, they would descend into lives of homelessness, crime, and drunkenness. Prior to Federation in 1901, almost all support for people with disability came from an individual's family or from donations from churches and charities. The notion that people with disability were entitled to funding or support didn't exist. They were viewed as dependent on the goodwill of others and unable to make decisions about how to live their own lives. Shortly after Federation, in 1908, the newly formed Commonwealth Government made Australia one of the first countries to introduce a nationwide government-funded income support system through the introduction of the invalid pension, known today as the Disability Support Pension. Both the First and Second World Wars led to a rapid increase in the number of people with disability. To cope with increasing demand for support, the Commonwealth Government began to consider alternative forms of care to asylums and institutions. The Commonwealth Rehabilitation Service was established in 1941 as the first government-funded rehabilitation program in Australia. Another important shift during this time was the expansion of the role of volunteer and charity organisations. There was significant expansion of the number of sheltered workshops and accommodation services run by volunteer and charity organisations. There was also a rapid increase in the formation of associations for people with disability, often set up with and by people with disability and their families. These organisations tended to focus on improving quality of living, as well as searching for medical cures and rehabilitation opportunities. With additional government and organisational supports, more and more people with disability were able to live outside of institutional settings. However, although more often physically located within communities, people with disability still found themselves frequently excluded from many mainstream services and limited in the choices they could make about how to live their lives. Separate schools, transportation, and infrastructure was still the norm. During the 1950s and 1960s, Australia's Commonwealth and state governments increasingly provided funding through disability organisations for accommodation, employment, and other support services. However, the real shift in the way disability services were provided came as part of the international disability rights movement. disability advocacy groups fighting for disability rights across the globe departed from the view that disability was just a health condition to be treated or cured. They understood disability as the outcome of environmental barriers put in place by society, which unwittingly excluded individuals with disability by organising itself only with those without disability in mind. From the 1970s through to the 1990s, Australia introduced a range of initiatives to more actively recognise and support equal rights and opportunities of people with disability. In 1986, it introduced the Disability Services Act, which provided a comprehensive framework for the funding and provision of disability support services across Australia. In 1991, the first Commonwealth State Disability Agreement was signed to reduce the amount of duplication and complexity in disability funding and service arrangements. And the agreement gave the Commonwealth responsibility for income support and employment services, and the states and territories responsibility for accommodation and other support services. In 2007, the United Nations adopted the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was ratified by Australia. This viewed persons with disability as subjects with rights who are capable of making decisions about their own lives based on their free and informed consent, as well as being active members of society. Personalisation has been a key driver of changes to Australia's disability support system in recent years and has shaped the design of the NDIS. And there's a spectrum of personalisation. From the shallow end, personalisation is just a user-friendly interface with existing services. On the deep end, individuals can directly commission, co-design and co-produce services. Self-directed care is now closely associated with providing individual budgets to people for their care. And under this arrangement, individuals can purchase the various supports they need. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, small-scale personalisation and self-directed funding projects for people with disability were set up in multiple states with the intention of promoting greater choice and control with more flexible and responsive services. Unfortunately, by the start of the 21st century, Australia's disability support system and outcomes for those who relied on it was far from ideal. Under Commonwealth state disability agreements, Commonwealth funding allocations for disability supports were based on the previous year's funding adjusted for indexation rather than an estimate of the actual support needs of people with disability. This meant that many people were not getting enough services or were not getting services at all. In 2008, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd held the 2020 Summit to discuss critical policy areas for Australia's future. A proposal for a lifetime care and support scheme for people with disability was put forward and supported at the summit. In 2009, a confronting report titled "Shut Out: The Experiences of People with Disabilities and Their Families in Australia" was published. The Shut Out report concluded that Australia's disability system was broken and broke. Submissions to Shut Out also noted that programs and services seem to be built around the needs of organisations rather than the needs of individuals. The existing funding model was not portable. Someone receiving services in one state might move to another state and no longer receive services. And there were problems with service access, quality, and one-size-fits-all approaches. Many people called for a fundamental change of the system, calling for individualised, flexible funding packages that people could spend how they saw fit. The Productivity Commission subsequently released a report in 2011 that echoed the conclusions of the Shut Out report and recommended that an NDIS be introduced to provide insurance cover for all Australians in the event of disability. The NDIS described by the Productivity Commission combined influences from Australia's disability sector with elements of its existing accident compensation schemes. It reflected the growing influence of personalisation within social services, describing a service model which would provide participants with individualised funding and support packages tailored to their unique goals and needs. Similar to contemporary accident compensation schemes, the NDIS described was to be overseen by an independent statutory authority, the National Disability Insurance Agency. The NDIS was legislated in 2013 and went into full operation in 2020. What a celebration. We've come a long way from the routine segregation and institutionalisation of people with disability, and the NDIS truly represents one of the most important social reforms in Australian history. Although the NDIS has clearly helped many people, there have been a range of criticisms of the NDIS, including plans not being made with the input of people who understand the particular disability, difficulties finding needed services, and delays in services or equipment being provided. The funding of fringe therapies such as chanting and tarot card reading, corruption and fraudulent claims, and budget blowouts and questions around the sustainability of the entire system. Of particular concern to us are reports from parents that it's difficult to access parenting support, and from organisations and practitioners who used to provide support that they are no longer able to do so. So why might there be less parenting support under the NDIS system? Well, for a start, there appears to be a lack of clarity around who is responsible for providing parenting support. According to the NDIS guidelines, the NDIS is responsible for supports that are specific to a child's developmental delay or disability, which certainly sounds promising. After all, the literature tells us that of all the supports that can influence a child's development, none are more important than the supports they receive in their home. However, the only reference to parenting programs in the guidelines comes in the section on what child protection and family support systems should be offering. Is it that the NDIS will not fund parenting support? Well, it's confusing because we know that parents do access parenting support through the NDIS. In fact, third-party organisations such as Children and Young People with Disability Australia recognise the importance of parenting support and provide guidance to parents on how to access it. You can see here an excerpt from one of their fact sheets that reads, "As a parent or carer of your child or young person with disability, you can receive funding to improve your ability to support them to achieve their goals. Some examples of training for your caring role include understanding challenging behaviour and supporting positive behaviour." We also know that the NDIS can pay for training for carers and parents because it's in their price guide. Training parents and carers to care for a person with a disability is remunerated at $71 per hour. However, it seems that there may be a financial incentive to provide individual direct therapy services to the child. Therapies such as occupational therapy and speech pathology are remunerated at almost 3 times the rate, $194 per hour. Psychology at more than 3 times the rate. To further understand why there may be less parenting support, it may be helpful to understand the pathway to supports through the NDIS. The personalised funding model of the NDIS relies on people with a disability and their families having the knowledge and capacity to understand and prioritise their support needs, making informed decisions regarding which services will best meet these needs, advocating with a NDIS local area planner for desired services, the NDIS planner understanding the needs, budgeting funding, and assisting the parent connect with suitable services, and service providers making the desired supports available and accessible to parents and carers. We believe that there may be barriers at each of these steps. It's important to remember that it is parents and carers who are the ultimate decision makers as to what services they'll access for their child. They may not be aware that parenting support, including parent-mediated therapy interventions, will benefit their child, perhaps even more so than therapy services delivered directly to the child. Consider the thousands of potential teaching opportunities that arise naturally over the course of each day that parents could take advantage of, each opportunity being contextually appropriate for the learning to be meaningful and functional for the child. For parents who have a disability themselves, there can be concerns that requests for parenting support may lead to a referral to child protection, as suggested by the NDIS guidelines. NDIS planners may not be aware of the benefits and existence of parenting programs. They might also believe that any kind of parenting support is the responsibility of child protection, and that concerning child behaviour should be addressed through the mental health system. For service providers, there may be a financial incentive to provide direct therapy services rather than working through parents. Also, cost-effective group parenting programs, previously delivered when organisations were block funded, are now less likely to be provided because they require multiple parents to independently, contemporaneously request the same service. Does it matter if less parenting support is accessed by parents raising a child with a disability? We absolutely believe it does. The research is unequivocal. Of all the potentially modifiable environmental factors that influence children's development, none is more important than the quality of parenting children receive. Parents are uniquely placed to provide an optimal environment for children's development. And there is overwhelming evidence that young children with disability and their families benefit from tailored parenting support. Parenting support programs tailored for children with disability is associated with enhanced language and communication, more developed social skills, greater independent living skills, strengthened emotional regulation, and better mental health outcomes. These changes have been shown to endure over time. But the benefits don't just stop there. Benefits have also been found for other family members, including parents having enhanced parenting skills, less conflict in the home, less stress for parents and siblings, and happier family relationships. And these factors are vital when thinking about increasing parents' capacity to support their children's development and ensuring that a child's informal support system endures over time. I want to show you a video now of a parent with an intellectual disability who accessed support through the NDIS. It's a success story that provides insight into the powerful impact the NDIS can make to the lives of families. This video is part of a suite of resources for parents with intellectual disability that the Parenting Research Centre and the Raising Children Network developed to support parents' understanding of the NDIS, and its development was funded by the NDIA.
Hi, Ash. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for coming to talk to me about your experiences with NDIS. Well, tell me about sort of day-to-day parenting in your house. Like, how are things shared between the two of you?
I guess it's shared between us. Get up, they have recce, and then get ready for daycare and then go to daycare.
So the NDIS stands for National Disability Insurance Scheme. What was happening in your life around the time that you got on the NDIS? Were you a mum then?
No, I think I was becoming a mum.
So it was just before you were pregnant around that time with your first son. What sorts of things do you use NDIS funding for?
Supports for like shopping, just maintaining stuff in the house. And at the moment we're doing like driving lessons as well.
Do people come into the home to help you with other stuff, like stuff to do with your parenting?
Not so much parenting, but like just help with maintaining and stuff.
Maybe if we talk a little bit more about when you first got on the NDIS and when your first child, your son, was born, was it a difficult time for you? People were starting to question whether you could be a parent, whether you should be a parent and that sort of stuff?
It was a difficult time, but we got by with the help that was provided.
What sort of help was provided?
I had one person come in to do overnight stays.
For about a week, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had someone come into the home and help to show you how to do things.
Yes.
Having someone there who can support you and show you how to breastfeed or make up formula or put a baby down who's not, who's crying and not sleeping well. Mm-hmm. They stayed overnight. Did they stay during the day as well?
No.
Okay.
So I had time to myself through the day, and they'd just come back overnight time.
And if you had difficulties during the day, did you have someone you could call to ask for help or?
Yeah, but I was pretty much all right.
The other thing that's important with NDIS is that it's your money, right? You have the choice and the control over the money. And what sort of stuff do you choose to spend it on?
At the moment, I'm doing, like, as I said, like learning to drive and stuff.
So you sat down with a worker or a planner, I think they call them, and they had a conversation about your goals probably. And so you told them that one of your goals was to learn to drive.
To get my P's.
To get your P's, yeah. What other things would you choose to use, or would you like to use the NDIS money for?
I guess going out a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe going to mum groups.
Yeah. Have you ever done a mum's group?
Was doing a few, but then they all finished.
What sort of stuff did you do there?
It was just mainly talking about like the behaviours with your children and talking about things.
What else has been the most helpful thing for you in having the NDIS?
I guess people coming in and helping, getting me motivated.
So the people that you work with, you find them, like people that come into your home, you find them quite encouraging and motivating.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it sometimes hard to find the right person, the right match between you and a worker?
Yeah, it is. Like I've had some that I didn't like really much.
And are you able to be clear about that? Like, are you able to say, I don't want that person coming, or?
Well, I have in the past.
That's good. That's how it should be, because one of the ideas of the NDIS is you have choice, right? You can say, I want this, but I don't want that. So you went to your coordinator and you said you weren't happy, you weren't being listened to. What did they say when you told them that?
I think they were proud of me for like standing up for myself.
And what difference did that make to your life when you spoke up and had a voice?
Pretty much changed everything. Like I was able to have a choice in what I wanted to spend my money on.
That's good. That's a good example of you using your choice and control.
I guess it makes me feel like I'm more of an adult.
More of an adult, yeah. And
I get to have a choice in life.
Because ultimately you're the one who knows your children best. It's important that you're the one making the decisions about what happens to them and what's important for you and your family.
Yeah, I just felt more freedom.
What would you say to other parents who are feeling like you were 5 or 6 years ago, like like you didn't have control of your life? What would be the message you would give other parents like that?
Speak up, because we all should have a say.
Because your kids are going to learn from that too, aren't they? If they see mum standing up for herself.
Yes.
And if a parent was saying to you, oh, this NDIS thing, yeah, I've heard about it. I reckon I probably could get it, but I looked at the form. It's too confusing. I can't be bothered. What would you tell them?
Helped me with my parenting, was able to keep my children.
That's a pretty big outcome. That's pretty big positive out of that one.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ash, for coming to have a chat with me today. And you've got one on the way.
Yes.
Yes. So what are you looking forward to for this little bub?
Them growing up together, just seeing them happy.
So what an outcome. A parent is able to keep her children. And I think it's clear that by providing parenting support, the NDIS has an important role to play in enhancing the lives of children and parents with disability. And I want to acknowledge the wonderful Catherine Wade as the interviewer there. So what do we think should happen? Well, we think that the NDIS should maintain a list of best practice parenting programs for children and parents with disability that can be used as a resource to inform the decision-making of parents, carers, NDIS planners and service providers. Purveyors of parenting support programs should develop and evaluate low-intensity, disability-specific parent support options, including online options, to increase reach and affordability of parenting support, particularly for families living in rural and remote areas. Health professionals undertaking developmental assessments, for instance, to determine children's eligibility for NDIS support, should make recommendations on how to best support each child's development to inform decision-making of carers and NDIS planners. Training to carers in parenting support should be remunerated at the same rate as capacity building supports delivered individually to the person with a disability. And finally, we think that the NDIS should track and provide aggregated data on the nature of supports funded so that the delivery of parenting support provided through the NDIS can be tracked over time. And what have we been doing to address these barriers? We've been raising awareness of the policy ambiguity and the importance of parenting support through professional publications. We've recently had a manuscript accepted with the Australian and New Zealand Journal of Psychiatry. We've been challenging the idea that parenting support is just about behaviour problems or mental health. We've done this through our submission to last year's Joint Standing Committee inquiry on the NDIS. We've also commenced systematic reviews of evidence that parenting support can promote children's daily living skills. We've been attempting to raise awareness to parents and planners of the benefits of parenting support through online news publications and the social media. And we intend continuing our efforts, including through a submission to the current NDIS review and advocacy with policymakers. In terms of disclosures, I want to alert you that I am a co-author of the Stepping Stones PPP program. Bruce Tong and Avril Brereton are authors of Preschoolers with Autism. Sharon Dorr is a developer of Parents Under Pressure. Catherine Wade is a developer of Parenting Young Children. And Kirsten Baird-Bate and I Have a Child with Autism and access NDIS support. I want to sincerely thank you for your interest in this topic. It's one that we think is extremely important, and our team would welcome your comments, questions, and any suggestions you have for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trevor. That was really insightful. I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say incredible work that you and your team are currently doing in the area of NDIS. So thank you so much for presenting to us today. I believe we do have a question. Denise, would you like to ask Trevor your question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Trevor. It was interesting to hear that history for someone who's only been in the sector a few years now, and most of that during COVID lockdown. So still learning, getting to know people. This is the particular focus area for STAR Victoria, who I work for, is parents with intellectual disability in the child protection system, and access to NDIS supports is actually a key area. Catherine, who I think is on the call today, was actually an experts forum that we had last week. That one was focusing on a Charter of Rights. But one of the areas that we do want to focus on is the NDIS and parenting supports. And we're finding it incredibly uneven. Some parents are able to access supports, as we just saw with Ash's story. What we're curious about is, why is it so uneven? I mean, why do we even have the situation where in one mother that we're supporting right now, a particularly ableist, shall we say, child protection worker went so far as to call the NDIA, querying the supports in this mother's package and whether or not that those supports were permitted in order for her to be able to have her child remain in her care, because the preference, of course, is to remove the child and put it into foster care or out of home care because there's a belief that parents with intellectual disability aren't able to parent their children. Ash has shown that that's not true. But why is it, why in your view, is it so uneven across the country? Why do some planners, local area coordinators build in the core and capacity building support for parents with intellectual disability to keep the families together and others do not?
Denise, that's a question we're asking ourselves as well, because we have found there is so much inconsistency across whether or not parenting support will be supported by the NDIS, by individual planners in different jurisdictions and so on. And we do, hence our deep dive or our analysis of the NDIS guidelines themselves. And it does look like there's confusion, there's inconsistency as to whether or not parenting support is able to be accessed through the NDIS or not. And of course, also, we know that NDIS planners come from such a range of backgrounds, and we do wonder whether, about their awareness of the suitability of support and what the benefits that can be obtained from it. I think there is the need for greater awareness, more training amongst NDIS planners. I don't know, I believe Catherine may be online as well. I don't know whether she would like to contribute to.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. Great job. Well done, Trevor. Great presentation. And thanks, Denise, for your question. I think, Denise, exactly as Trevor said throughout the presentation, it's that lack of clarity in the documentation and the guidelines for planners and for LACs and for parents themselves and family members about what is funded and fundable under the NDIS. That's at the core of the problem. But I think the other challenge, in addition, that parents with intellectual disability face is, in particular, that ambiguity about what is fundable in terms of parenting supports. The NDIS application, it almost requires that parents need to frame their parenting as in need of support in order to justify being able to use the money for that. But we know that for parents with intellectual disability, the consequences of them raising their hand and saying, I've got an issue with my parenting, I think I need more support, the consequences for them tend to be much greater than for other parents, because of course that flags potential for a child protection concern. And we know what the consequences of that. They're much more likely to have their children removed than any other parent. So paired with this lack of clarity, you've got this kind of stigma issue that's particularly salient for parents with intellectual disability, which means that they're less likely to be having conversations with planners about the need for parenting support, which obviously compounds the issue of them not asking for supports in the right way.
So why did Ash manage to get why has she had such a good outcome? That's the thing that's screaming out of the screen at me. If she managed it, why do others not get that same consideration?
Yeah, well, I mean, in Ash's case, I know she had very good advocates around her. She had very good workers who were very strong advocates for her personal circumstances. And, Denise, the value of advocacy. And so she was also in a region where the NDIS was initially trialled or piloted. So it's been around for a little while now. So perhaps things have been bedded down in that particular geographic region a bit longer than it had been for others. But it's unambiguous.
I'm also aware that depending on how you couch what the needs are, can make a difference as to whether or not supports will be provided to reach those goals. So, I've heard, through service providers that if it's couched in terms of addressing problem behaviours, for instance, well, then some planners will say, well, that's not the NDIS's responsibility. That's a mental health issue. Whereas if it's about, building skills, capacity building supports to build greater independent skills or promote participation in community activities, well, then that may be given the green light. We're building alternative behaviours, but it's a case of semantics, because if there's problem behaviour, it would always be looking at what are the alternative behaviours we should be teaching the child to acquire anyway. So yeah, it's frustrating.
Thank you so much, Denise, for that question. And thank you, Catherine, for your input as well. We might head over to Fiona, who has a question for you as well.
Hi, thank you, Trevor. Hi, Catherine. Not so much a question, I suppose, more of an observation. I manage programs, parenting education programs at Tweddle Child and Family Health. And we see a little bit of inconsistency. Well, we work with parents with an intellectual disability, but sometimes also have children who have an intellectual disability. And I think there does seem to be a little bit of inconsistency between what parents with an intellectual disability can access for parenting support, but then what parents of a child with an intellectual disability can access for parenting support. So we did have one successful we developed a package to support a parent whose children had intellectual disability to go in and help establish an evening routine, because sleep and settling and their behaviour was an issue, and eating meal times was an issue because they had feeding difficulties, etc. We were able, but it was not an easy process. Again, I think it comes down to what Catherine was saying about advocacy. This family had a great NDIS support person, and they were able to access one of the boys' plans and utilise funds from that in order for us to go in the evening to support mum to implement parenting strategies. So it isn't an easy system, but I do think it's different when you're looking at it from a child's perspective and what the parent needs in order to support the child with a disability. But then from a parent, I do think that sometimes parents with an intellectual disability, it is a lot easier for them. No, it's not easy, but it is easier for them to access our parenting support services rather than it is if it's for the child. It isn't an easy system, which is why I'm here today. And it's been great to sort of understand the NDIS, because we're forever in our office going, why? And it's just, it's been great. So thank you. It's a work in progress, I think, for all of us who work in this space.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Fiona. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your input there, Fiona. We did have a comment in the chat from Natalie, who mentioned in terms of remuneration being at the level of capacity building, she believes the better outcome would be if evidence-based parenting programs were considered as a capacity building support and could utilise the capacity building budget. Any thoughts around that, Trevor?
It's certainly, if people are being discouraged by providing evidence-based parenting support on the basis of a lower rate of pay, that's clearly something that needs to be addressed. And so, yeah, any way that it's equitable. I mean, it is possible that some therapists are providing parent-mediated interventions and parenting support with, the rates that they're getting, which we have no problem with, but we just don't know what sorts of supports they are providing. Anecdotally, a lot of therapists and practitioners are working individually with the child when we think that it's likely that we'll see superior outcomes if parents are getting coached up and becoming more skillful in taking advantage of teaching opportunities that arise day to day as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We also had a comment from Charmaine, who said family support services tapped into prior to NDIS entry seems to be an important factor in services accessed through the NDIS once supported by this scheme. Would you like to talk more on that?
Sorry, access to parenting support prior to entry into the NDIS system?
Yes.
I'm not familiar with that. I'm not. I'd like to hear more. I don't know whether any of the members of our team are familiar with this.
Charmaine, if you're still online, you're more than welcome to elaborate on your question.
Yes, I just thank you. It just seems as though particularly parents with these additional support needs around their parenting, that some parents are entering the scheme with these support services that then I think really have these lovely relationships with planners and are able to advocate for needs, which I'm wondering is one of these differential factors as to who's getting what. But I also agree, Trevor, I think it seems more related to the service provider, and clearly there's some evidence around that. And in my experience, there's some people being very creative with funding codes and how they're delivering different services, and others who just never even thought that was an option. So it's really lovely to have I guess that sort of sense and experience validated by what you've presented today. But yeah, my work and my research has been around thinking about what happens, you know, even prior to diagnosis and prior to entry of the scheme for parents of children with emerging developmental challenges and difficulties. So there does seem to be significant variation with who's getting what even before the NDIS becomes part of the service picture. And that seems to potentially be a bit protective, but it'd be interesting perhaps to look at this more detail. Yeah.
I don't know if this is quite what you're referencing, but the idea that parents who have accessed parenting support prior to entering the NDIS, I mean, to the extent that they've had a positive experience with parenting support and recognise the benefits that you can obtain from it, I'm certain that they would see the relevance of, you know, seeking out some tailored support for their parenting when raising a child with a disability. So I could see that they would be better advocates and, you know, could articulate the argument with their planner as to the relevance of these kinds of support. So yeah, it does make sense. Yeah, thank you for that comment. And I guess that speaks to the importance of providing good parenting support universally across the entire community. And so that will help educate people who, or, you know, all parents who can benefit from this kind of support.
And a quick question off the back of that, Trevor. Do you think there's appetite for more sort of global change with how the family's looked at as the recipient of supports and services as part of the current NDIS review, or do you think that's a little bit ambitious at this stage?
Globally, I certainly think that there historically, and maybe it's true that the NDIS has been slanted to the individual with a disability, but really when we're thinking about a child with a disability, well, we've got to be thinking about the supports that wrap around the individual. We need to be supporting the supports. I guess that's true of all people with disability, really. But I mean, it seems to be, to me, a no-brainer when it comes to kids with disability. It's about the entire system. I agree.
And what's your sense of how well those messages are being heard higher up, Trevor? I think we're all a convinced group here, but in terms of those that may not see the scheme working in that way, or looking at addressing all the barriers that have been mentioned to working in that way, do you think there's opportunities for
I think this
breaking those down?
I was looking at the feedback from the current NDIS review. They've published a report saying what we've learnt so far, and they are recognising that there are issues to do with children in particular, and I think the support systems more broadly. I also was looking at feedback that other advocacy groups, such as Children and I think it's the Children and Young People Australia, or with Disability Australia, and they have put forward a very strong submission arguing that we've got to be looking at the family system through the NDIS. So I certainly hope that the message is getting through to the people that can make a difference.
Thanks, Trevor. Share that hope with you. Thanks.
Thank you all for your thought-provoking questions. If nobody else has any further questions, we do have one come through. Thank you, Daryl.
Trevor,
please feel free to jump in, Daryl.
Yeah, my question is whether the strong association, and you mentioned it, and I think Catherine mentioned it as well in her comments, the kind of strong association with parenting support and the child protection system, that they're almost this sort of symbiotic relationship, that's kind of part of the problem, that there is no universally accessible, non-stigmatized access to parenting supports, and therefore for people themselves, whether they be parents of children with a disability or parents with disability themselves, that fear of getting into what can be a very negative system for many people is what drives them away, and also in the minds of planners may make them think that, well, even if I suggest parenting support, basically I'm saying, oh, you're on track for entering the child protection system. It's kind of code for that. What do you think about that comment?
I think that comment has a lot of merit. Seeking support to be a better parent or to better support your children's development should certainly not be tainted with this idea that, you know, you're somehow inadequate or you know, not doing a good job, because that's simply not the case. Yeah, I can see Matt's raising his hand there. Did you want to step in, Matt?
Yeah, it was just a comment, really. I think one of the major challenges here is to kind of avoid the sort of silver bullet kind of idea that there is a particular moment in time where parenting support is going to be necessary, and then later on it's not going to be necessary, because there are both continuities and discontinuities in the kind of support that's required depending upon, you know, the stage of development of kids. And that I think we just need to make sure that we've got a model that enables people to access it, exit from it, re-enter, exit, depending upon the contemporary challenges that they're confronting as kids, you know, start school or move into puberty, or, you know, beyond periods of formal schooling and so on. And I just don't think that the system is sort of really geared to thinking about it in that way. And I think about it in that way for all families, actually, not just kids with disabilities and special needs, but it's a really important issue. I'd like your comment on that, whether you agree with it or not, or
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, it's when you're talking about parenting support, it's a full spectrum. It's not one size fits all. It's and every parent can benefit, you know, regardless of when you are supporting your children, regardless of their age or their particular circumstances or needs. You know, at times we will benefit from some additional support. And so it's not just a case of something that should just belong to child protection. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Trevor, Warren Can here. I've forgotten how to put your hand up on Zoom, so I'm just butting in if that's right. That was a great talk. I just want to pick up also on what Daryl was saying. I wonder whether we do have a framing problem ourselves when we talk about parenting support, because what we're sort of coming from is a means angle rather than an ends angle. So when it comes to children with developmental delays and disabilities, parenting support is important because of the impact it can have on those children in terms of their nurturing and development. So in that sense, it really aligns with what NDIS needs to do when it comes to children, which is promote their development. Because we call it parenting, it gets confused with the adult getting something, not the child. So there's a real languaging issue here. When it comes to parents with intellectual disability, the problem is even more exacerbated because it suggests deficit. Whereas you could conceive of parenting as a part of life, as an occupation, as the way you consider leisure or work or social connection, in which case supports to fully engage with all aspects of your life is what we're talking about, rather than we need to address this because this child might be removed. So I just wonder whether even talking about parenting support like that gets in the way, because we're talking means, not ends, and we'd be better off reframing this and coming at it from an ends perspective. What do we achieve with parenting support rather than we need parenting support? So I don't know whether that is...
Yeah. So, you're the I love your ideas on messaging, getting messages across. So I think that's a great suggestion. We should be putting that up the front. You know, what is it that we are trying to achieve through supports, disability support, and this happens to be one of the best ways of achieving the ends that we're seeking.
And even with our conversations with these people, we don't want to be having a conversation with a parent that they're alluding to or suggesting that they need parenting support because there's a deficit involved, nor a parent of a child with a disability do we want to allude that the solution here is parenting correction. It's like that's not the point. It's not about identifying remedial factors here. It's about promoting protective factors and supporting the parent in their own functioning when it comes to... Yeah, I think there's a lot we could do in that space, just to think about how we're promoting this in the community and to funders and to clients.
Thanks, Warren.
Thank you so much, Warren. That was a really nice way to sort of frame how we should be approaching parenting and disability support. So thank you for your comments. We also have another question from Fiona.
Just one, sorry, I know everyone's in a hurry and I think this is such great conversation. I just had a question because I don't work in the NDIS space. If a parent, or if it's deemed that the parent needs support or the child needs parenting support, from my experience, it takes a very long time then to do a plan review and to then get the funding and the supports to then get the is that correct? Because where we see it, you know, the parents come to us at crisis sort of point, they're in family services or they're with child protection, and then we're trying to seek funds to then implement parenting education and support. Is it something that does take a while and that needs to wait till there's a review plan, or is it something that you can just sort of say to their NDIS support person, they really need this, can we add it to their plan now? Like, I don't really understand the process. If a family or a child needs something, why we have to wait for weeks or months till a review to get the funds to support them in that crisis moment.
I'm just thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if the supports were available anyway to get in early, and so, you know, parents are equipped, you know, right from the beginning. And I think would be the benefit of universal delivery of parenting support. It should be just something that is provided anyway. I can't. This planning process, it necessarily would take time. I don't know the timeline that it typically does take, but it would be terrible to think that if things are, if families are experiencing particular difficulties, it's taking a long time to access the supports that they need. I don't know whether Bruce or Catherine wish to comment.
But yes, Trevor, it comes back to this problem of there's such a diversity of practice within the NDIS across the country, depending on local administrations and in particular on planners. But certainly it is possible, and in fact, in some areas advocated, that children coming in early to NDIS before, for example, any so-called diagnoses are made, that is very little children who are eligible for NDIS because they have developmental delay. very easy to access. A paediatrician or a GP or a speech therapist can just write the form and away it goes. They're eligible for NDIS. And in some areas, part of that might include parenting support right at the beginning, and that's when it should happen. But I think we do have a problem at getting the message across that it's not the parenting support, but the end product, the outcome, and that is the child's maximal development. And that's what we've got to be selling. Just like, you know, if you want maximal development of healthy teeth, you put fluoride in the water. If we want maximal development of children, you support parents. But that's a very difficult message to get across. And it's not just child protection that has this view that we're talking about deficit parenting. In other words, parents that are deficit. It's some of the politicians say this. I've had politicians say to me, yes, but, you know, parents should be doing this anyway. Why should you label parents as being incompetent? Should we be funding parents who are competent? We're saying that it's the outcome. Quality child outcome requires good enough parenting, and that needs support. We don't come into it, do we, with a manual in our back pocket as new parents?
Thank you so much, Fiona, and thank you, Bruce, for your input as well. Now, I just want to check if any quick last-minute questions have come in. Otherwise, if you could all please join me again in thanking Trevor for his incredible seminar today.